1945. It was done to depict the newsrooms of the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News at that era. And there's a lot of great journalists in that mix. But now you're among them, and that's as it should be. And you're with David Simons. So one thing
they all look strangely sober.
They do. But notice how large Elsie Ward, the receptionist, is?
Yes.
Just think about it. She was the key figure in their lives.
That's beautiful.
So they made her bigger. And the cigar-chomping sports reporter, the boxing writer with the gambling habits, and the old typewriter of the sports column.
Right.
So. But if you'd like to ask David some questions now, this would be a most excellent opportunity. It's only going to be for a few minutes, so
awesome.
Axe away, as we say in Joyce.
Pressure's on.
I've had 2 martinis, so anything can come in. Good answer is what that means.
Don't be
I got
shy.
a question. What do you think the number one skill a journalist who wants to be successful in today's day and age needs?
Well, I say this and it sounds so simple, but here's the absolute truth. When I got to the Baltimore Sun, and I even sensed it in my college paper, but when I got to the Baltimore Sun, which was at the time I would say probably like a top 10 paper, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around there if you sort of measure them all out. Like you would think that journalists were curious by nature, that's what they like. The reason I wanted to be a reporter was I didn't have the guts to choose a real profession and say I'm going to be a lawyer or an engineer or anything. I was like, I want to like go out and see something different every day and not have it be the same as the next day. Like, so for me it was really innocent. I kind of like, it was like not choosing a career.
Right.
Like it was, I get to see something different and come back to the campfire and tell you about it. And that to me was like the beautiful part of newspapering. And I got to this high-end paper. I got hired on it. I was very young. I was 22. And the number of people who didn't want to go anywhere and ask a stupid question or show that they didn't know the answer to the question that they were already asking or show that they were like, completely naive was astonishing to me. There were people who did not want to explore the world. Like, they would be sent out on a story and their demeanor would be, and I'm saying like this was half the newsroom, their demeanor would be like, I already know everything before I leave the newsroom. And there's that power of like, I'm a journalist, I'm supposed to trade in cynicism, I'm supposed to know everything before you say it. I know your answer. I'm asking you the question, but I know what the true answer is. And that was like prevalent. And I didn't realize how damaging it was until I started like doing books. So, like, okay, I'd been a police reporter for two years, and they put me in the homicide. I got to go in the homicide unit to write a book, and it was amazing how much I didn't know about the police temperament. That was legitimate. That was like another world. And then the same thing happened on the drug corner when I did the next book, which was, okay, I think I know what it means to sell drugs. I don't have a clue what it means to sell drugs, And some 16-year-old is going to teach me, or 15-year-old. And years later, after the corner came out, and I was sort of like, I was in a different place with one of the people in the book, who at the time was a drug dealer. He said, "You know why I decided to like let you follow me around?" And I said, "Why?" It was DeAndre. And he said, "You just look so fucking stupid." You're standing out on Vine Street, and we were twirling, and we were moving, and like drugs are like, we were like working the stash, and you just looked like you were fucking in the way, and like I just felt sorry for you. And it sounds silly, but I don't know if anybody knows the name Homer Bygart means nothing to people in journalism now. But my dad was the guy who wanted to be a newspaperman. He was a PR guy, but he was a journalism major at NYU, and he worked at the Hudson County Dispatch for like a year before he went into the Army, and then when he came out, he had a kid, and he took a PR job, and he never got to do what I had fun doing. And he would teach me about, like, he would like say, like, read this lead, read this nut graph. That was dinner at the dinner table at the Simon House. Pretty tragic. But he said, okay, Homer Bygart. Homer Bygart was a guy who won 2 Pulitzers, one at the Herald Tribune and one at the Times. And he was famous for, he had a speech impediment. So nobody at the Herald, he was a copy boy, and nobody let him like cover stories because they thought he was an idiot. in the way they used to think people with a speech impediment was an idiot. And finally, they let him, in his 30s, early 30s, they finally said, okay, go out and cover, whatever, in Brooklyn. And he brought back something gorgeous, and they let him do something else. And finally, they realized he's a fucking genius. And so he still had the speech impediment. And he won the first Pulitzer. He went up the Empire State Building. An army plane had hit the Empire State Building right after the war, I think 45, 46. And he got a clipboard. Classic move. He got a clipboard as if he was an official. And he got on the elevator with Fiorello de this is the second martini talking. He got on with the mayor. He was standing in the back and nobody noticed him. So he actually got up to where the plane hit the building and saw all the carnage and everything. And he won a Pulitzer for spot news reporting, or whatever the category was back then. And then he won the second one for war reporting in Korea in the 50s, all with this vicious speech impediment. And the famous story about, which can tell you everything about how brilliant this guy was one day he moved to the business desk. He wanted to cover business news because he thought, well, this is interesting. I haven't experienced this before. And one day, the head of Esso, this is before Exxon, is having lunch with Punch Salisbury, the publisher of the New York Times. This is when he was at the Times already. He said, I can't believe the idiot that you sent to interview me. And Punch says, why? What happened? He goes, I had to explain everything to him. And that's it. I had to explain everything to him. This was a guy who was fearless about being ignorant. And I worked with so many people who wanted to know everything before they knew it. And it made listen, open your eyes to the idea that other people's lives are not yours, and they know things that you don't. Even if they're struggling, even if they're I was dealing with a corner of people with addiction, or even if they're linear, or they don't know things that you know. They don't read the books that you read. They still know things that you don't. The idea of listening is a lost art in all of the country, in America. We don't do it, but that it's a lost art to journalists is just tragic. And I was amazed at the number of people at my paper who wanted to know everything before they asked the first question. It was and to me, the reporting was the most fun part. It was, when you had to write, that sucked. That's just you and the computer. But the reporting was show me something I haven't seen before. That was why I wanted to be a reporter. So indulge that. That's my advice. Just gave a whole speech on one question.
That's great. That was great.
No, but I actually believe that. it was the one thing that I had going for me was I was willing to be the stupid guy at the party who said, are you guys doing drugs here? How's that work? How's that work? Aren't you afraid of going to jail? What are the cops doing? There was no question too stupid. And at some point, it was even weirdly endearing.
That's what a Denver homicide detective told me once at a murder scene, and he just said, "Kid, there are no dumb questions."
Well, it's true. There are no dumb questions. And even if there are, forgive them.
Ask them.
Forgive
them and ask.
Because in some ways, making yourself the butt of the joke is a reporting technique. Make yourself a comedy. I did a piece called Generation Kill, where it was a reporter named Evan Wright who was embedded with recon. So they were at the point of the spear going into Baghdad in the war. So he was embedded, and he was with Rolling Stone. So obviously, immediately the Marines didn't trust him. You're some fucking communist hippie dope smoking freak from Rolling Stone. But he was in the lead Humvee of the lead vehicle, and I talked to him about his reporting technique, and it was basically Homer Bygart. It was basically he endeared himself to those guys at one point when they were about to step off, and there were some missiles fired over the border into Kuwait, and they thought there might be chemical weapons on them, so they all had to put on their masks, and the masks are part of this mop suit, sort of chemical suit that,
right.
And it straps on from the groin, and his was too short, So he was basically giving himself he basically giving himself blue balls. He couldn't breathe. He was like he was a 6'4" guy, and at some point he collapses, and he's like he can't even breathe, and the other Marines are all standing over him, and they're going like, "Reporter, you were seriously the biggest fuck up we've seen since Camp Pendleton," and at that moment he owned them. They were like. He went from being the asshole that we don't want along on the mission to the mascot who we're laughing at. And at that moment, they would tell him anything. And so, the glory of being stupid is that they keep you around, and you get a better story. And again, the only thing that counts against you, the only place where you don't want to be stupid, is in the copy. So, be willing to be a fool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what do you believe is the most impactful story you've ever told, and why? And what kind of impact did it have on your community?
I can't count fiction. I can't count like The Wire or stuff like that, because that's not honest. I mean, I put on a little different hat when I do that shit. Yeah. And I don't make shit up. So in the non-making shit up category,
yes, that one.
Which, by the way, is problematic in journalism these days, but it shouldn't be. I think The Corner as a book was a very intelligent argument against the drug war, and it came early. You got to remember that book came out in '97, and a lot of the arguments you started seeing against mass incarceration and the ineffectiveness of the drug war and of drug prohibition as a whole really date to the next decade. Mm-hmm. So I felt like we were early, but I felt like we got it right. And I felt like it educated me to the point where I could then make fiction that was a critique of the drug war. Mm. But I will say this. I grew up, I wanted to be a journalist because I grew up in the Washington suburbs when Watergate was happening.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm not old. And I was in 1974. I was 14, and because of my father, instead of doing something healthy with my life, I was reading the Washington Post every day. It was my hometown paper, and I was watching them chase this president down, run him down, day by day, in sort of a quotidian adventure, and that it was a very it made newspapering feel to me like, well. You write the stories and then you fix things. People look at your stories and they go, well, we'll make it better. And the next 10 years of my life, until I was sort of out of paper and I sort of had some experience, I sort of believed in that. And then I started seeing around me other guys who were having I don't know if you're too young for this, but the newspaper crusade, we're going to pick something out, lead paint poisoning or hunger, or something that everyone can get on. We're all against this. Yeah. We're all against this. Who could be on the side of lead paint poisoning? And we're going to find somebody who's the absolute embodiment of evil, and we're going to critique it, and we're going to hold them up to ridicule, and then they'll come behind us and they'll hold committee hearings, and maybe they'll even pass a law, and we'll win a Pulitzer, and we'll be good. And that's and there was a simplicity to it that I started to find offensive, in that it started to shape the coverage in a way that became dishonest and complex problems that actually were intractable because they had two sides to them. Because there was a legitimized fear of X, but the problem of Y when you address X, that's the modern world. The modern world is the systemic world. If you're going to really try to address problem solving in journalism, it's never as satisfying as gotcha. And gotcha became the paradigm in journalism when I was there, and the guys who ran my paper became devotees of that. And so I felt like, after a while, I walked away from your question, which is to say, I never said to myself after maybe the first 3 years in journalism, I'm going to write stories and it's going to fix anything. Instead, I felt liberated by saying, that's not my job. I could write a series of articles explaining exactly what's going wrong, and the Maryland legislature will pass a law that will fuck it up worse. And it's not my job. And I wish it were my job, because I could probably do it better than them. I'm that arrogant. but it's not my job. My job is like, I'm gonna pull this through the keyhole, and it's gonna be exactly what it is in real life,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna depict it, and it's gonna be there in all of its argument, and then you will fuck it up, and I can't fix it.
So isn't that so hard though? Because you just pass it off, and you're like, "Here you go, public. Do what you will with this information."
You know
Like, how do you?
that happened
come
to me,
to terms with
my
that?
senior year in college, right? Which was my 5th year, because
Mhm.
that was that much of a fuck up.
Yeah.
But I edited the college paper, and then I had like 60 credits left to get out of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to get hired by the Sun, and I was their stringer. And the basketball coach at Maryland, then a guy named Lefty Drizel, he did something so fucking wrong that he should have been fired. There was a woman, an undergraduate, who, it was sort of like one of these, she wasn't raped, but it was like she was grabbed and thrown on a bed. It was what would be called in police parlance like a 3rd-degree sexual assault. But a player had taken liberties,
Mm-hmm.
and she had complained to the Judd board, and the player was barred from the ACC, and the coach, who was a complete totalitarian asshole, his ACC basketball, Lefty Drizel, said he called the woman at her dorm and screamed at her over the phone. She hung up on him twice. The 3rd time he called her, the Judd board head, because she called the Judd board, was on the phone, was like at her apartment,
Mm-hmm.
on the phone, hearing the basketball coach at the University of Maryland screaming at her, saying, "If you don't withdraw your complaint, I'm going to trash your reputation." So, like, he should have been fired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you not fire the guy? So I wrote the stories, and I was a stringer at the Sun, and I thought, this is the first little pelt I get to hang on my journalist wall. Like, is this a pelt wall? Every journalist thinks they're gonna have a pelt wall. I'm gonna put like
these are the
Lefty
outfits.
Drizel's, like, you know, his skin is gonna be right here, you know, and I'll be able to show it to you. Come in and I'll go, Lefty, you know, that's Lefty right there. And I wrote the stories, and it was the story that got me hired at the Baltimore Sun. It was like they were like, holy shit, you wrote, because I had sources on the Judd board. I mean, I the guy who picked up the phone talked to me.
Yeah.
And so the story ran, and it was a big deal, and Lefty was caught dead to rights. And I waited for them to fire him. And instead he got a 5-year contract and more money from God, from the university.
Yeah.
And at that exact moment I said to myself, in a very healthy way that saved me for the next 20 years, I did my job.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, you know, the chancellor didn't do his job, the board of regents didn't do their job. I did my job. Fuck you. And that is his help. Like, I didn't overwrite the thing to try to get Lefty fired. I didn't underwrite it to try to, you know, I just wrote it. This is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now you, the world, will figure out what to do or not to do.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you know, God bless you.
Guys, on that note, we're going to head across the street. And David, thank you for
Thank you.
sharing these insights.
Thank you.
I only got through
Thank
2
you so
questions.
much.